oops, whether you're providing congregate versus non-congregate sites, who's providing the meals, and how you plan for how food will be delivered safely. Next slide. I'm sorry, I have a big something in my screen. Okay, sorry. Only schools that are part of the USDA National School Breakfast and School Lunch Program do not require an additional permit to operate. The congregate summer feeding site and or cooking site must have an LDH permit to operate. If the school serves food at a different location, then they'll need a permit at the other feeding site location, except for grab and go sites with no food holding overnight and no food preparation. Sites must have a Louisiana Department of Education approved sponsor. The temporary permit will expire. Next slide. Title 51, Part 23, Retail Food Establishments requires that anyone who sells or distributes food have an LDH permit to operate. The sponsor or site needs a LDH permit to distribute food. However, non-congregate grab-and-go sites with no food holding overnight and no food preparation will not be required a summer feeding permit. The sponsor kitchen and site must meet the sanitary code requirements. That's the Louisiana Administrative Code, Title 51, Part 23, Retail Food Establishments. It can be found at our website, eatsafe.la.gov. Next slide. There are many different types of sites that can be provided. There's a full service kitchen, satellite kitchens, outdoor sites, mobile units, and there are options for congregate and non-congregate options for limited sponsors. Next slide. For the full service kitchen, it's any kitchen that prepares, cooks, or heats food to serve. These sites will be required to have a hand sink with hot and cold running water in all food prep and dishwashing areas, including soap and paper towels, a hand sink with soap and paper towels accessible for the children in congregate settings, away from food prep areas. They'll need a 3-compartment sink, a grease trap. The chief building official in your parish is the one who sets those requirements. Cold holding equipment and possibly hot holding equipment depending on the menu. Soap, sanitizer testers for washing, rinsing, sanitizing, a mop sink and dumpster pad, and restrooms for staff and children dining at the site. Satellite kitchens are kitchens where no food preparation or cooking takes place. Food is provided from a sponsor-run full-service summer feeding site or from a commercial kitchen with an LDH Food and Drug Manufacturing permit. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. All food items must arrive on temperature, and a log must be used to record dates, times, and temperatures of the food. USDA and LDOE require that you retain logs for 3 years plus the current year. Minimal food assembly is allowed. With congregate dining, a hand sink must be available with hot water and soap and paper towels for children and servers to wash their hands. Also, restrooms for staff and children at the dining site are required. Next slide. For congregate feeding sites only, there are minimal requirements for feeding sites that must be met for a permit to be issued. The feeding site staff must have access to equipment and plumbing noted as available at the site. Children dining at the site must have hand washing facilities and supplies. The permit must be posted at the feeding site for all days of service, and the temporary permit will be issued for dates provided by your sponsor. Next slide. For congregate outdoor dining sites, all food must arrive as a packaged unit. No food assembly is allowed. Utensils must be returned to the prep site for proper dishwashing and sanitizing. Containers must be maintained clean, such as campers and ice chests, and a hand sink with hot water, soap and paper towels must be available for children and servers, as well as restrooms. Congregate dining mobile units are basically traveling food establishments. All food must arrive as a packaged unit, and again, no food assembly is allowed on the mobile unit. The food package or plate must be assembled at the commissary. For these types of establishments, the safest meals are shelf stable, but if food is transported to the sites that's potentially hazardous, the mobile unit must use time as public health control. The operator is required to have a written plan, keep logs, and discard all potentially hazardous foods at the end of the 4-hour allowance. And logs must indicate that time was removed from temperature control and when time was removed from temperature control and time for discard. Also maintain the logs for 3 years plus the current year. Food again must be labeled with the discard time. Single service utensils and plates are allowed here only. Congregate feeding mobile units. So these require a commissary, and this is a base of operations. It's a Louisiana Department of Health permitted brick and mortar building where food is stored, prepared, and held at the appropriate temperature before being delivered to the site. A letter from the commissary is required. The mobile food establishment must report to the commissary daily for supplies and cleaning services, and the commissary is provided for dumping and flushing liquid waste from the wastewater tank. Liquid waste shall be discarded to a permitted sanitary sewage system. The servicing area must be kept clean and in good repair. Potable water servicing equipment must be installed to prevent cross-contamination, and potable water must be obtained from the commissary for hand sinks if used. For the congregate mobile feeding unit, restrooms must be provided by the stop site. A hand sink with hot water, scented paper towels must also be available for children and servers. The site may add additional hand sinks with portable sinks for use by the congregate mobile unit. If the portable hand sinks are used, they must be filled with potable water and wastewater must be discarded. The operator must include a schedule of proposed times and address of stops on the route. Next slide. I'm not going to go into too much detail this time. The congregate versus the non-congregate delivery vehicles. Basically, congregate mobile food establishments are what we just talked about. They're traveling food establishments. They do have to have a permit. They do have to have hand sinks at the site to wash their hands, restrooms. And the non-congregate delivery vehicles are for the grab and go meal delivery to homes. Limited sponsors are able to provide this service this year. You don't need to have a permit to operate for delivery vehicles. Next slide. The non-congregate meal options, again, that's only if you fall into that those type of providers. Louisiana Department of Education will explain who's allowed to do that. But basically, if you do provide non-congregate meal options, you're just going to provide you're just going to provide labels on those meals since they're not being eaten at the site. They have to be labeled specifically with meal contents, the source of food, holding temperature, and the temperature that should be maintained safely, 41 or below, or 135 or above, until given to the recipient. And also they should have rewarming instructions if necessary. For the one-day meals, they may use time of public health control. But again, you have to have written plans in place submitted to the health department beforehand. For again, time of public health control, you have to have times on the food to be discarded. Next slide. So my understanding is there are many different types of providers on the call today. And so we're just going to go the types of applications that are required for each provider, each different type of provider. So any cooking site that does not have a current annual LDH permit to operate must submit the retail food plan review packet questionnaire. Also, please include a floor plan and a menu and the summer feeding site questionnaire. Both of these can be found at our eatsafe.la.gov website. Any first-time use site that's never been used as a summer feeding site also must submit those same 2 questionnaires, retail food plans review packet questionnaire and the summer feeding site questionnaire. For returning school food authority sponsors with no change in operation from the previous year's submission, only submit the summer feeding site questionnaire. And if you're a congregate mobile food unit, a traveling food establishment, then you're going to submit the mobile food establishment plans review questionnaire, but you also must submit a floor plan, a menu, a commissary letter, and time of public health control plan for potentially hazardous foods. You'll also submit the summer feeding site questionnaire and provide a list of locations where children will eat the food. Next slide. The summer feeding site questionnaire, whenever you're ready to submit that, you're going to submit it to the local LDH office a minimum of 2 weeks prior to your food service beginning. Plans can typically take 7 to 10 business days for review and approval, and plans aren't always approved, so please don't wait until the last minute in case they have additional questions in regards to your permit. Also include a floor plan of the space and a sample menu. And also remember that April 15th is the deadline to apply with LDOE as a sponsor. I said a different date on a previous presentation. April 15th is the corrected date for LDOE sponsor registration. Next slide. For plumbing requirements, you'll have to contact the CBO, the chief building official in the city or parish that regulates the plumbing. They regulate it for the restroom fixture counts and grease trap sizing. Make sure that you also contact them early for approval of the site. Next slide. So if the site manager doesn't own the site location, the sponsor must submit a site agreement made with the owner of the site. Include the information regarding the equipment that the summer feeding site will have access to in the facility, and provide the times that the summer feeding meals will be served. So basically, if you, for example, are using a church in the summer feeding site manager doesn't own the site, then they're going to have to submit a site agreement with the church. So the church is basically going to state which equipment is going to be used that the summer feeding site will be able to use, and also provide the times that the summer feeding meals will be served at the site. Next slide. Okay, so in regards to transportation of food, sponsors who plan to deliver or have delivered prepared food to multiple feeding sites, including grab and go and meal delivery routes, they must submit the locations and routes of all feeding sites, including, again, non-congregate grab and go sites and non-congregate meal delivery routes. So for the meal delivery to homes, Louisiana Department of Health doesn't want to know the individual recipient's home locations, name, or contact information. We just want to know the route and the proposed delivery times. With that, you'll submit a written plan explaining the delivery plan for holding food safe at safe temperatures. And also, please submit a plan on how you will train your staff to monitor and record temperatures. Next slide. So in regards to the mobile units, again, not including non-congregate meal deliveries to home, meal delivery, each unit must submit an application packet. The operator must include a schedule of proposed feeding times and address of stops on the route. And if potentially hazardous food is served, you'll have to submit a time of public health control plan to the local LDH office. Logs must be maintained, and again, it's the responsibility of the cooking site to mark when food was taken out of temperature control, and it's the responsibility of the feeding site to mark when food is used or discarded. The commissary letter also must be submitted to the parish. Next slide. So after plans have been approved, the parish sanitarian's office will send an approval letter to the applicant. You must contact the LDH sanitarian's office to schedule a pre-opening inspection. The inspector will schedule your inspection, but you must be the one to call to let them know when you're ready. A person with the legal authority to sign for the sponsor must sign the temporary permit to operate before or at the time of inspection, but a person in charge of the summer feeding site must be on site at the time of inspection. There's maybe two different people. Next slide. At the opening inspection, the site should be ready for service. Refrigerators should be at 41 degrees or lower. You should have hot water, sanitizer test strips for your washing, rinsing, and sanitizing of dishes and equipment, and also soap and paper towels must be provided. The permits will not be backdated to include dates of service previous to the issuance of the permit. Basically, if you started operating before you had a permit, we're not going to include those dates. In some cases, based on the length of service, a second routine inspection is required if it's longer than 31 days of operation. Next slide. The issuing of a temporary permit occurs when all requirements are satisfied and the site passes inspection. The site must not operate until a temporary permit has been issued. Permits are not transferable to other owners or locations. And the end date on the permit indicates the end of food service. If extensions are needed, the sponsor should contact the LDH office to request an inspection. To request an extension. So the sponsor should request the extension for the site if needed. Post the temporary permit from the Louisiana Department of Health and the inspection reports at the feeding site during the hours of operation. Also remember that the summer feeding site must have a temporary permit to operate. Make sure that to submit the summer feeding application and retail food plans review questionnaire at least 2 weeks before you plan to operate. Please don't wait until the last minute. And the deadline for for sponsors to submit applications to LDOE is April 15th. Next slide. Also, you can find more helpful information at our website. It's www.eatsafe.la.gov. On the homepage, when you scroll all the way down, when you initially go to the site, scroll all the way down, and you'll find the summer feeding information, and you can find the questionnaires. This is the summer feeding questionnaire. The plan to be packet questionnaire and the mobile food establishment questionnaire can be found under the new businesses tab on our website. You may also contact the local LDH office for a summer feeding site questionnaire. Not every LDH office has clerical staff. Many sanitarians run their own parishes and inspect in the field. So please remember to contact the office before stopping by to ensure someone will be there to help you. And this is my contact information. I'm Alina Carlin. My supervisor is Carol Newsetzer. That's our email and phone numbers if you have any questions. I'm free to take any questions now if you like.
Thank you, Alina. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box and we will we'll get Alina to answer those. Thanks, Alina. We don't have any questions that have come through the chat box. So if you do come up with questions that you have after this, you can feel free to email Alina and get those questions answered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll start the actual training on the LDOE portion of the summer food service program. So I'm going to turn it over to Shanna Leger to take over from here.
Good afternoon. So if you're present for today's training, just know that this is a repeat of the first version of this training that we did last Tuesday. And if you're present today, you should be quote unquote a returning summer food service program sponsor. So that could mean a couple of different things. That could mean that you participated last summer and you're returning this summer, or it could possibly mean for some of our universities and government-based organizations that you're returning from pre-pandemic times with a plan to come back and participate as a sponsor in summer 2022. I kept these acronyms. Okay, sorry. I kept these acronyms in this training, even though we are technically all returning sponsors, and I think the majority of you are probably familiar with these acronyms, but as you all well know, LDOE, Division of Nutrition Support Staff, we like acronyms and we use them often in emails and verbal communication. So you will see some of these acronyms used throughout today's training, and we have 2 slides worth of, basically defining those in the event that maybe you're not familiar with some of them. So when we're talking about SFSP, which is what today's training will be based on, of course, we're talking about the summer food service program. We had a training last Monday on the seamless summer option, which is another summer meals program, but that is only available for our school food authorities. So those school systems that traditionally participate in the National School Lunch and or school breakfast programs would be the only type of sponsoring organization that could have a seamless summer option program in the summer months. All other summer sponsor types, governments, universities, private nonprofits, their only option for summertime meal service would be SFSP. And then of course, when we use SA, we're referring to state agency, meaning our staff that work here at the Louisiana Department of Education, Division of Nutrition Support. We do use the acronyms for restricted open and closed enrolled sites pretty often throughout the presentation, so I just wanted to list those here. And then of course, I think everybody's familiar with LDOE, DNS. Of course, we've had Louisiana Department of Health speak to us already, LDH, and I think we will touch a little bit on LD8F in this training, Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, which I think most of y'all are familiar with, the commodities program. And then of course, all of these programs ultimately are overseen federally by USDA. Next slide. Okay, so these are our agenda items for the next hour and a half-ish. There's a lot to cover in today's training session. Some of the items that we discussed are going to go out of order from this agenda that's listed here. For example, Department of Health went first. But we can go ahead and get moving into the section so we can see if we can get all of this covered today. All right, so we're going to jump into requirement to publicize the summer food service program and a little bit more on LDH first. Okay, so school food authorities, again, this slide is just specific to our school food authority organizations. They are required annually per federal regulations to provide summer food service program outreach. So if you're on the call today, more than likely you're planning to have a summer program of your own. Therefore, you would be required to publicize your program, and you'd want to publicize your program to get the participation up. But even school food authorities that don't traditionally have a summer meals program, they too are also still required to publicize the availability of the program in their community. So memo 21-X168 talks further about those requirements. And once we do post this training to the Louisiana Fit Kids website, as well as our own website, y'all will be able to access these slides and then use these direct links that we've provided throughout. Okay, now this slide is kind of talking about all SFSP sponsoring organizations, all types. So remember, if you are a sponsoring organization that operates open and or restricted open sites, you must promote your program to the local community. There's a variety of different ways that you can do that. USDA really doesn't speak to one method being better than the other, but generally speaking, if you're going to have open and or restricted open sites, if you can use a multitude of these different options, then you're more than likely to actually reach more children in the community. On the other hand, if you plan to operate closed enrolled sites and or campsites, which really are not a very common site type in Louisiana, you would be doing promotion and outreach as well, but you would be doing this to a very targeted segment of the community. So for instance, you may be a school system and you're offering a program at maybe 5 out of 20 sites, and you are only targeting the children that are enrolled in your school district. Well, then you may just send flyers home towards the end of the school year to promote that program and to give them the option to sign up. You wouldn't publicize it in the local paper, on the radio, because it's not open to the community at large. As a reminder, and this is often a review finding, please be reminded that any type of brochure, flyer, publication, anything that you draft and provide to the community or to the public that pertains to child nutrition programs such as summer food service program, it must include the non-discrimination statement. Anything that pertains to free or reduced student eligibility, which we don't see all that often with SFSP, we see that way more often with National School Lunch and School Breakfast. but anything pertaining to free and reduced student eligibility or any document that is greater than 1 page in length must contain the full non-discrimination statement. If you are drafting something, maybe a menu or just a 1-pager that you're going to send out to the community, you can get by with using that simple short statement, which reads, "This institution is an equal opportunity provider." So the exception to that is even if you have a flyer that's a 1-pager that's front and back, that's still considered a 1-pager. You could still do just that simple one-line statement. But once you exceed 1 page in length, you have to have the full non-discrimination statement. And this is a quick way where you can access the full non-discrimination statement. On the homepage of our CNP website, we always keep that current. So we have that, I guess, kind of circled in red. And then the short statement would be that very last sentence at the bottom. Another thing to mention too is that on any publications that you develop, when you are listing the non-discrimination statement, whether that's the full statement or the short version, you cannot list it in a font size that is smaller than what you're using in the body of your document. So if your document is Arial 12, you can't then just paste in the non-discrimination statement and put that as like Arial 4. It's got to be legible and it's got to be a font size that's equal to or greater than what you're using in the body of your document. Okay, we're going to talk about some of the prototype forms that are available in our CNP website. This is really nothing new. This has been a feature that we've had available for years, but we just wanted to remind you guys that once you are able to access your 2022 Summer Food Service Program application, once you have completed it for the sponsor level application and each of your facility level applications, the moment that you submit it for us to begin reviewing and ultimately to approve, you can begin to use the letters feature. So remember, this is all under the purple summer feeding tab. The letters feature is found under the applications link on the left-hand side. And then once you click on letters, you'll have 3 options. So for media release, you have 2 different options. You have one that is open, which is for open and or restricted open sites. And you have one that is for enrolled sites, meaning closed enrolled. So once you submit your information, a complete application to the state agency, you can pull the media release that's applicable to your program and all of the general information that would need to be included in a media release. It's just going to populate over into this prototype from what you've submitted. So it'll have site name and address. It'll have meal types being offered, start and end time of those meal services, days of operation. It'll indicate holidays when you're closed, and it will have the full non-discrimination statement on it. Likewise, under the letters option, there's also a prototype health inspection form, and it works the same type of way. Once you've submitted your current year 2022 SFSP online application, you can then click on health inspection, and it will pull in all the details of your sites that you've submitted. And basically you can use that information to send to your local sanitarian's office. And that's letting them know, A, that you are planning to have summer food service operations occurring, and also B, that there's likely inspections and permitting that they'll need to schedule and come out to the sites and complete. We did touch on this already, but this is just some additional ways that you can target the population. There's one way where you can kind of do outreach specific to parents, and that's the first list of bulleted ideas. And then the second one is maybe how you can outreach specifically to students. And again, like I mentioned previously, if you have open sites or restricted open sites, the more of these different formats or the more of these different media outreach methods that you use, likely the more families will be aware of what you're offering. And again, you're not expected to do all of these types of things if you're going to be operating a closed enrolled site, because you're not targeting the population at large. So there are some free summer meals forms that No Kid Hungry has provided. I did test the link, and it's basically just posters that you can put out near your site or put in public areas so that the community knows that, maybe there's a site around the corner. These do not tie to any particular year, so they're applicable from year to year. And again, once you get these slides, you can click on free summer meals yard sign, and you will get brought directly to that link. Then we did also want to mention that I think it was the later part of 2021, the text number that families could use to find the nearest SFSP site location to them. It changed from 877-877 to 304-304. So that is now the current number that they would text the word food to, either in English or Spanish, and that will provide them with the nearest SFSP site. And you can also go to the link at the bottom of this slide to do a more detailed search, depending on which meal types you're interested in, which days of the week. You can kind of customize the search a bit more. We put this slide in here, not necessarily because you guys need this, but we always get the question of where individuals can go to see which sites are currently approved in each parish throughout the state. So we just wanted to put, information on where that can be accessed. This is public information, so anyone, even individuals without a login to our CMP website, can go to the homepage, and then rather than logging in, they're going to access the helpful links -grouped scrolling area. They'll scroll to the bottom of that to the subheading Summer Food Service Program, and then they can click on SFSP approved sites by parish. So that actually gets updated pretty much in real time. We obviously don't have anything listed there now for 2022, but once we launch the 2022 website and we start actively approving these applications in April and May, this information will start getting pulled over. And so anyone, you could share that link with really anyone if they want to see which sites are currently approved and operational in the parish in which they live. More on open and restricted open sites. These site types do need to have information regarding the program that's being offered at the site publicly posted. So we do ask that sponsors do post the information pertaining to days of operation, dates of operation, meal service types and times, start and closing dates, and contact information for the sites and for the sponsor at each of these locations. You essentially could use the same information that you're pulling from that letters template for the media release and possibly edit it some if you think you don't need all of that information, but this base information on this slide should be posted at restricted open and our open sites. So we just wanted to put a reminder slide in here of what physically should be present at each summer food service program site. So posted on site, each feeding location in a publicly visible location, there should be at least one And Justice for All poster, the most currently or most recently issued permit to operate for that site, and the latest health inspection. So remember, when we say publicly visible location, that means that if a parent comes in that's accompanying a child, they should be able to walk up to it and read all the information contained in those items. So it shouldn't be behind the service line or in the cafeteria manager's office, for instance. It should be out in the area where the kids are actually physically moving through. Other items that should be kept on site would be the complaint procedure, which is a fairly new document. Towards the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about some additional SFSP webinars that we have scheduled for April and May. And one of those is specifically on record keeping. So we plan to talk about that complaint procedure. It's a prototype form. There's basically fields that you just fill in to customize it for your organization. But we'll talk about that a bit more at that training. And then of course, the non-discrimination complaint form should always be present at any site, should any family or child have a complaint that they want to move forward to USDA. One more thing on Injustice for All posters, I'm sorry. We just learned last week, I believe, that the Injustice for All poster is under construction again. So there's going to be another new version coming out. We don't have an ETA on that, but we have been told that since a new poster is in the works, they're not currently producing, they being USDA, any more of these green Injustice for All posters. So at the state agency, we are working with a limited supply. We did find an additional stash of them recently, so I think we do still have a few hundred copies on hand. Again, you're only required to have this poster one per feeding site in a publicly visible location. However, if you're going to have some new sites that you have not operated in the past, or if some of your returning sites no longer have them, they're ripped, they're not even legible, you can still try to request some of these from us. We ask that you email the request to childnutritionprograms@la.gov, our general email address, and just indicate how many copies of the poster you need and where to mail it and to whose attention. So I think LDH did a really good job of pushing this message, but we just wanted to remind everyone that as an SFSP sponsoring organization, it's your responsibility to notify your local sanitarian's office of any and all planned summer food service program activities that you're going to have. And that's true of any sponsor type and any site type. So even though our school food authority sponsors may be operating a summer food service program only at their school sites, which already hold a year-round permit, it's still their duty to notify LDH that they're going to continue to operate in the summer months. And then from that point, LDH will determine if there's anything additional that those sites would need. So you always have to notify them of your intent, where you're going to operate, which meals you're going to serve, et cetera, et cetera. And they then make the determination as to whether additional documentation needs to be issued. Again, please be reminded that sites must not begin operating until they have all of their LDH required documentation on hand. So if you're a returning sponsor and you're planning to operate at returning sites, just receiving that online approval from us does not mean that you are legally ready to begin operating a food service. If you don't have a current permit for all of your sites, you're not legally authorized to begin a food service. So you have to have the required approvals on both ends, LDH and LDOE. And you all were provided with Alina and Carol's contact information if you have any additional questions relating to permitting or inspecting for summer feeding. All right, here's the really fun part. So we're going to move on to what is new in summer 2022. And there are fairly a good number of new things to discuss. And this is where it does get a little bit tricky because there's some things that are applicable for seamless summer option, which again, only our school food authorities have the option to participate there. And some of those things that are applicable and available there are not an option for summer food service program at all for summer 2022. So we'll kind of go through what's new with SFSP, and I have a feeling that there will be questions that will come in through the chat. Okay, so as of now, we are planning to launch our 2022 Summer Food Service Program online application in the mid to late part of this month. And actually, since we developed this slide last week, which just kind of gave you an idea of when we applied for some waiver options that are available for summer 2022 for the Summer Food Service Program. Since we've applied for those, we have now officially received approval for use of all three. And we actually got that last approval yesterday on a Sunday. So at this point in time, the state agency has been approved to be able to offer 3 different summer food service program waivers to our sponsors. And we're going to go into those in more detail. So anybody that was operational in summer 2019, again, this was pre-pandemic. We don't remember too much from before the pandemic, but anyone that did operate in summer 2019, you might remember a lot of talk about policy rescissions. And at that time, we had 4 different waiver options that sponsors could apply for. Well, we, the state agency, have applied for 3 out of 4 of those options. And the ones that we've applied for and just received approval to utilize are use of offer versus serve for non-school food authority sponsors, meal service timing flexibility, and program monitoring, the ability to waive the first week visit. So that policy rescission reference that I made from summer 2019, there is a memo that goes further into that. It's a Q&A. and it kind of breaks out some commonly asked questions relating to those categories where waivers are. So if you want to read up on that, that's posted to our website as Memo SFS 19-35. Okay, so this slide is now out of date. So the state agency has, effective yesterday, received approval to offer these 3 waiver options to our sponsoring organizations for summer 2022. And so at this point, the state agency has been approved and authorized to offer these waivers. It's ultimately going to be each sponsor's responsibility to go into the website. And again, we don't have this in the website yet. Once we launch the 2022 application, at that same time, we'll have this waiver information ready for you guys to make a decision on. So each sponsor will have to go into the website once we launch the application, and they will have to make a decision on all 3 of those waiver options, whether they wish to use them or to decline use of them. Okay, so we're going to go over all 3 of them in a little bit more detail. So use of offer versus serve for non-school food authority sponsors. So again, this does not pertain to our school food authority summer food service program sponsors. This pertains to our other types of SFSP sponsoring organizations. So that's our private nonprofit groups, our university-based and our governmental-based summer sponsors. So without an opt-in and approval for use of this waiver, you guys would have to essentially offer and have all of the children accept a complete meal. And by that, we mean all specified components have been offered and at least the minimum specified serving size to all of the children participating in the program. So that would mean that children would have to be offered and accept all 3 components at breakfast and be offered and accept all 4 components, which equates to 5 offerings at lunch. Some exceptions could apply to this, even if you do not opt into the waiver. And that would be like a diet order where a child's doctor has very specifically said, you know, they have an allergy to cow's milk and you must substitute with 100% fruit juice. So that would be an exception to this rule. Otherwise, the majority of the kids, if you don't opt into this waiver and receive approval, they'd have to be offered a complete menu, a complete reimbursable meal, and they'd have to take that entire complete reimbursable meal. So if you're a sponsoring organization and you do request use of offer versus serve in your program, once you get an approval for that from the state agency, you elect how and where you want to apply it. So for instance, if you're approved to use offer versus serve as a non-school food authority sponsor, you can apply it to breakfast and or lunch and or supper. You cannot apply it to snack. That was never an option. The supplement, AKA snack option, always requires that you offer 2 of the 4 options of components in the minimum portion size, and children cannot decline. They have to leave with those 2. I think the next slide, and I'm gonna get to that. So please be reminded that if you're approved to utilize offer versus serve via the 2022 waiver, as a sponsoring organization's administrator and or coordinator, you are responsible for ensuring that the online SFSP application is reflecting exactly how and where offer versus serve is being utilized, which meal type or types are you using it for, and at which sites. You need to also ensure that your site level staff are trained on use of offer versus serve. So that has been an issue in the past where we've interviewed site managers and they really weren't sure if offer versus serve was supposed to be offered at breakfast. They knew they were doing it at lunch. They had been offering it at breakfast, but they never really got clear guidance on whether or not it was intended to be offered at breakfast. And then of course, your staff need to be trained on how to recognize what a reimbursable meal is when offer versus serve is being used. So we talked about this a little bit later, but I did want to mention that with offer versus serve at breakfast, that seems to be the trickiest application of offer versus serve because it does require the sponsor to alter their menu. So normally you have to offer 1 full serving of bread grain at breakfast, a half cup of fruit vegetable at breakfast, and milk at breakfast, 8 ounces. If you're doing offer versus serve, you have to add something else to your menu. And that can be another full serving of fruit vegetable, as long as it's a different type of fruit vegetable than what you originally were offering. It could be another full serving of bread grain, or you can add a full serving, at least 1 ounce creditable of meat alternate. And then at that point, the children are being offered 4 things at breakfast, and they can decline up to 1, and that would meet OVS requirements. Okay, so we're going to move into waiver option number 2, which is the meal service timing flexibility. So again, all of this really went into effect in 2018. We had these waiver options set for 2019, and then the pandemic happened in early 2020, which kind of opened things up for waivers of all types. But you may remember that when those policy rescissions happened in late 2018, that meant that all sponsors were going to have to be held to some pretty tight timelines in terms of how long you can serve meals for. So without an opt-in or approval for use of this waiver, you would have to plan that your breakfast and or snack meal services would be served no longer than 1 hour at a time. So you could do breakfast at site A from 9 to 10 a.m. and breakfast at site B from 7:30 to 8:30. You can specify different times at different sites, but without this waiver approval, you could not exceed 1 hour in length for those services. And then the regulations say that lunch and or supper meal service cannot exceed 2 hours in length at any given site on any given day. Okay, so once opted out under this waiver, basically once a sponsor decides that they do want to opt in and get this flexibility, once you opt in, the website's going to recognize that, and it's going to allow you more flexibility with your online application. So you definitely will want to go to your waiver options first when we launch the website before you start doing any work in your actual sponsor and our facility level online applications. So if you opt into this waiver, at that point in time, the website's going to recognize that you can break the timing rules. So for instance, you'd be able to go and set a breakfast meal service time that exceeds 1 hour. So I just gave an example here of site A. They want to do breakfast from 7:30 to 9 a.m. for a total of 1.5 hours meal service. Site B wants to do breakfast from 8 to 10 a.m. for a total of 2 hours. Once that sponsor has opted into this waiver, it will allow the sponsor user to then go into the facility level applications and break the rule on maximum meal timing. Okay, we're going to move on to waiver option number 3. And that is basically the waiving of the first week program monitor visit. So an opt-in or approval for use of this waiver, it would allow sponsoring organizations to waive completion of the first week monitoring visit for any SFSP site that meets both of the following criteria. So the site would have to be a returning site, one that did in fact participate in the last SFSP that was offered by that sponsor. And it must also be a site that is in good standing, having had no significant findings on their last monitoring visit and or no significant findings or deficiencies on their last visit from the state agency or CM resource. So this is not a training for prospective new sponsors, but new sponsors would not be eligible to opt into this waiver because they have no history for these sites. And returning sponsors that are bringing on brand new sites in 2022 could potentially use this waiver, but they'd only be able to apply it to those sites that were returning and in good standing. Any brand new sites that you're adding in 2022, you'd still have to do the first week visit. You would not be exempted for those sites. As a reminder, the usual program monitor requirements are for a pre-operational site visit to occur. And that is if you have a brand new site added into your program, or even a returning site that's not in good standing, that's had significant findings on previous monitoring visits, you would have to do that pre-op site visit before the site even opens. A first week visit. So if you do not receive approval or you do not request use of that monitoring waiver, you would still need to do a first week visit at all of your sites. And regardless, you're going to have to do it at all of your new sites. And then please be reminded that the first 4-week monitoring review form, that is different than the first week visit. The first 4-week review is always required every year for every site. So even if the site is returning and in good standing, sponsors must always do the first 4-week review form. And we did want to make mention too that having a program at a site that's shorter than 4 weeks does not exempt you from having to complete that review. So even though you may have 1 or 2 sites that are doing supper for 1 week because they have Vacation Bible School occurring there, that does not exempt them from having to have a first 4-week review done. That just means you got to do it quicker at those sites. So if they're only operating for 1 week, you've got to do that first 4-week review during that week that they're operational. So where can I find these prototype monitoring visit review forms? We actually have a few different locations where these are posted on our website. You can go to USDA's SFSP sponsor guidance books at this link. And there's one specific to program monitoring that has all these templates in it. That link is also posted on our homepage to the right of the login in the helpful links grouped box. If you scroll to the bottom to SFSP, you'll see a direct link to this. We also developed a SFSP prototype forms booklet a couple years back. So we've been updating that, and it is posted as memo SFS 20-47. And then we also have those templates broken out and posted on our CMP website under just the general form section. So if you would go to memos resources under the login, click on summer food service program, click on forms, you would see a section that's dedicated for these. All right, here's where everybody gets a little bit unhappy. So for summer 2022, for the summer food service program, there are a variety of different waivers that were in place in summer 2020 and 2021 under the pandemic, but they've expired now. And to date, we have not received notice that these are going to be, that USDA is going to get authority to renew these. So at this time for SFSP 2022, there will not be the option for non-congregate meal service. There will not be the option to issue multiple days worth of meals. There will not be the option to utilize parent guardian pickup. There will not be the option to have home delivery or routes in which meals are delivered. And we also have one other area, which is closed enrolled site eligibility. That was the 4th waiver option that was available for the state agency to apply for. We did not apply for that this summer, but we're going to go into how closed enrolled sites can still qualify even without that waiver. Before we do that, we just wanted to have one clarifying slide added on what specifically this absence of non-congregate feeding, what does that mean for summer 2022 for summer food service program? So that means that children participating in the program will have to receive their meals one at a time during the specified timeframes approved on the corresponding online facility level CMP application. Additionally, the children will have to consume their meals in a supervised congregate setting, meaning that the children will not be permitted to leave the site or the designated grounds with their meal or any portion of it. So you can communicate with LDH and let them know that you're going to have indoor seating for children to eat. You may also have some picnic tables in a designated area on the grounds. You could let children eat there, provided that you've included that in your plan, but they still have to have supervision to ensure that they're not leaving the site with their meal. And it also means that children will not be permitted to receive meals intended for later consumption. So like last summer, for instance, we had some programs that would provide children with congregate lunch service. They'd consume their lunch, and then before they'd leave the school for the day or the site for the day, they'd pick up a shelf-stable breakfast to consume at home the following morning. That will not be allowed under SFSP 2022. So what does no closed enrolled site waiver option mean to my sponsoring organization for summer 2022? So if your administration is adamant that you're going to be operating closed enrolled sites, and again, that means you are only intending to have a food service that's going to involve kids that have actually enrolled to participate at your site for whatever programs you have on site. You're not going to serve to any other kids in the community. You're only going to serve to those children that are enrolled to be there. You would be able to establish free eligibility at those sites in one of two ways. So you can use sponsor-derived data, which is basically current free and reduced eligibility data on each of the kids that are enrolled. So if you're a school system, this may be easy to get, or it may not be, since we've had these flexibilities in the last couple of years, and a lot of you guys have been operating under seamless summer option. If you're not a school system, it's probably even harder for you to get that because we're talking student PII, we're talking about data security, and school systems may not be able to hand that information over to you. Luckily, we have an alternative option, which is state agency derived and provided data. So if you're in a parish that normally has schools that participate in community eligibility provision, we are going to provide or furnish you with a list of those school sites that participate in CEP, thereby allowing you to select one of those schools that is in the same attendance zone as your summer site. And that will let you establish area eligibility to provide free meals at a closed enrolled site. So on the next slide, I put in red, don't panic. It's confusing, it's hard to explain. I know that in the past, whenever we heard about just standard free and reduced data not being able to be used to establish eligibility at closed enrolled sites, we had a bunch of sponsors that panicked. But I don't really foresee this as being a big issue for Louisiana just because of the nature of our state. And community eligibility provision has become so huge that I'm not aware, Courtney, of any parish that doesn't have at least one site that participates. So I really think that when you get access to your online application, even if you are planning to do a closed enrolled site, you more than likely will be able to select sites from the dropdown that are CEP sites that you can then write off their data to establish free eligibility. If you want to discuss this before we even launch the website, if you're super panicked, you can always contact me and we can talk about it a little bit further. Okay. So this section is just going to basically be in the format of Q&A, and it's just some important reminders and takeaways that we want to specifically make mention of for our returning sponsors. And for this section, I'm going to hand it over to Courtney.
Okay, for this section, like Shanna said, it's going to be some questions and answers about SFSP operations. So the first question is regarding allowable meal types. So what meal types may be served by facility or site under SFSP over the summer months? For open sites, restricted open sites, and closed enrolled sites, a maximum of 2 meal types may be elected per facility or site per day under both SFSP and SSO. Any 2 combinations of meals is allowable with one exception. So the options include the meals that can be included are breakfast, AM snack, lunch, PM snack, and or supper. And the only combination of those meal types that's not allowable is serving both lunch and supper. Please note that sponsors may also elect to offer only 1 meal type at select sites and or may offer different combinations of meals among different sites. And all of this information is customizable on the site application on page 2. The second question regarding allowable meal patterns, what meal pattern can I follow if I am a school food authority summer sponsor? As an SFA summer sponsor, you can elect on the application to offer the school-based National School Lunch School Breakfast meal pattern or the more simplistic SFSP meal pattern. Indication of the meal pattern is in use can be determined on page 3 of each site application. Additionally, whether offer versus serve will be utilized at meal service can also be documented. SFA sponsors may apply offer versus serve to their SFSP operations without having to request the use of that waiver that Shanna previously discussed. Another question regarding allowable meal patterns. What meal pattern can I follow if I am not a school food authority summer sponsor? As a non-SFA summer sponsor, the SFSP meal pattern must be offered. It is at the sponsor's discretion whether it intends to also apply for the use of the offer versus serve waiver option for summer 2022. The use of that waiver is optional. However, offer versus serve cannot be used by any non-SFA sponsor without current approval of the use of that waiver. The next question, without use of the offer versus serve waiver, what am I required to offer to children in SFSP? So this is a screenshot of the USDA SFSP Nutrition Guidance book. There's also a link that's listed on this slide as well. So for breakfast, although this looks like there's all kinds of things that are required, you must serve 3 components, and that is a cup of milk, half a cup of fruit or vegetable, and then 1 serving of grain. And then remember, this is without the use of the offer versus serve waiver. For lunch, you must serve all 4, and that's milk, the fruit or vegetable in a serving of 3/4 of a cup, you have grains, and also meat alternate. So you will have 2 ounces of meat and 1 serving of grain, and the 3/4 of a cup of fruit or vegetable. Snack, you must serve at least 2 of the 4, and that can be milk, fruit or vegetables, or the grains, or meat. So with the use of the offer versus serve waiver, so this next slide is using that offer versus serve waiver. This is where things get a little bit more complicated, specifically with breakfast. So if you're applying for the offer versus serve waiver at breakfast, in addition to those 3 required items of milk, half a cup of fruit or vegetable, and the 1 serving of grain, you must offer a 4th item. And that can be an item that is one of those components. So for the vegetable or fruit or grains, but you must have 4 items. And I would say this is probably the #1 problem we see when it comes to meal pattern during the summer food service program. Under offer versus serve for lunch, the same components are required, but the students can leave the line with 3 of those items. So it's a little bit easier with lunch and supper because those items are already, you're not adding additional items. They're just able to leave the line with less. But breakfast, you have to have that 4th item for that meal to be considered reimbursable. The next question is regarding the waivers. So how will sponsoring organizations receive notification regarding the waivers? So this training was designed right before we got approval. So as Shanna said, the final approval came late last night. So we did receive approval for all 3 of the waivers that we applied for. If you want to use those waivers, you will have that option available as part of the online application, and you will need to select to opt in or elect each of those waivers if you would like to use them. You'll also need to opt out if you choose not to use those waivers. If after you've made your submission of your waivers, you determine that there's a problem, you can contact us by emailing us and we can release the waiver back to you for you to make corrections. What are the current SFSP reimbursement rates and where can they be accessed? So memo SFS 22-67 is the memo containing seamless summer for this school year, as well as for the summer SFSP reimbursement rates. And those are also available on our website. So if you go under the purple tab and then click on Program Administration on the left-hand toolbar, click on reimbursement rates, and you can then select 2022, and you can see the reimbursement rates for this current summer. Another question about where can you find the reimbursement rates? So this slide here shows the combined rates per site and meal type. So the system knows which reimbursement rates to use based on the site type on page 1 of the application. So the combined rate for rural or self-prep sites is this first column, and that is for breakfast is 2.6050, and lunch or supper is 4.5625, and snack is 1.0775. And all of our other site types, so the ones that are not rural or self-prep, the reimbursement rates are 2.5550 for breakfast, lunch is 4.5875, and then snack is 1.0525. This screen shows you a screenshot of the portion of the facility application where the meal preparation method is used to designate the reimbursement rates. So this has to be completed for each site. So here you'll put your information in, and if anything changes during program operations, you must report that to the state agency and have a approved revision to your application for that information to change. How will this process, so SFSP advance, so how will that work for summer 2022? So advance requests can be requested on revision 0, which is the initial program year application of the sponsor level online application. And that's going to be on page 5. It's on that application that sponsors are given the option to request an advance and may indicate for which months they would like to receive an advance. Please be reminded that in order to qualify for an advance in any month, the sponsor must be operational for at least 10 days in that month. Further, if the sponsor requests an advance for multiple months, but later changes its mind, it can request to cancel the second or third request by sending an email to childnutritionprograms@la.gov. Another question regarding claims for reimbursement. So will claims be combined this program year? And what about entry of meal data? Will this be by site, by date, or by month? So the SFSP claim for reimbursement will continue to be separated. So each month will be separate and contain only 1 month's claim data per claim period. And the state agency will permit SFA sponsors to complete the SFSP claims for reimbursement with a monthly meal data submission, as it's done with NSLP and SBP. And the non-SFA sponsors will need to enter daily details into the claim out as they have done traditionally. Who should you contact if you need a claim released for correction? So if you've just submitted the claim, it's either the same day or within the last couple of days, and you notice an error, you can contact our appropriation control staff. So Tamika Jean-Pierre is the main person to contact. You need to contact her in writing, and you can request the claim to be released back for adjustments. In that email, you need to indicate the name of your organization, the claim period that needs to be released, and the program. And then appropriation control will notify you once the claim has been released. Once it's released, you'll be able to make any edits, save and review, and then resubmit that for processing. And do remember that the normal claim submission deadlines apply. So do make sure you're not waiting till the very end of that claim submission deadline to make these adjustments. So what sites should you expect to see in your 2022 online application? So the state agency will review site level data for each sponsor's last year of operation. So sponsors returning from summer 2021 will have access to their usual sponsor level application and the facility applications for all sites that were approved to operate in summer 2021. And there's just a few exceptions. So exceptions would include sites that we've added that represented home delivery routes and or distribution or hub locations that were used in summer 2021 or summer 2020. Sponsors that are returning but did not operate during the pandemic due to concerns or risks associated with operations under those conditions should be treated as returning and therefore will be granted the sponsor application and one facility application per site. And it's going to be based on the last approved operations for that sponsor. So how can you request additional sites to be added to your application? So if the additional location is a school that normally operates under the National School Lunch School Breakfast Program for the same sponsor, the sponsor needs to send an email to Shanna, and she can requesting that site by name to be added to the application, and she will make that addition for you. If the addition is a non-school location or a school location that's usually served by another sponsor, then you'll need to complete the online JOT form, and you can access that JOT form at the link located on this slide. A current permit to operate must accompany any new site request in order for that request to be completed and added to your application. Also identify the name of the sponsoring organization in the field where that's requested so that we know which sponsor the site is looking to go under. Didn't mean to click on the form. I do. Oh, look at that. I'm all over the place. Hold on. That's right. Oh, that's the next section. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Shanna for the next section.
Okay, in this section, we're going to talk briefly about summer 2022 SFSP and seamless summer option reviews. So just as a quick FYI, CN resource staff is actually going to be conducting all of our SFSP and or seamless summer option reviews for summer 2022. And we actually should have some CNR staff present on today's call as well. So if we have any questions that are very specific for them and the processes that they may be using this summer, it's still a little bit early. We don't have every last detail ironed out yet, but they should be able to assist with any questions relating to that. Okay, so just kind of a brief overview. So the actual review schedule for summer 2022 is something that we are still finalizing at the state agency. My plan is to roll over to that as my primary project after we get through with this week's trainings. We still have 2 more prospective new summer food service program trainings this week. And then either last week or at the end of the week before, we got some information from USDA that actually gave us more flexibility than we thought we were going to have in terms of developing the 2022 review schedule. So some sponsors, in particular school food authorities that we thought would have to get reviewed in 2022, we may be able to skip a summer review on them, depending on how their administrative review on school side fell or how it is falling. But we do plan to have at least a tentative lineup of who's scheduled for a summer review this summer in the next 2 to 3 weeks, posted to the CNP website. And then as always for summer food service program reviews, the total number of sites that will be selected as review sites is dependent upon how many sites you're approved to operate for that applicable summer. So we have to do 10%. If you are approved to operate 19 sites, 10% is 1.9. We have to round up and select 2 sites for review. If you're a small sponsor and you are just, your central office plus 2 sites, we're always going to do a review of at least the sponsor level and 1 additional facility level. So you know, 10% of 2 sites is less than 1, but we do still always have to do at least 1 site observation at minimum. This summer, we are planning to do something new, and that's going to be the hybrid review approach for summer food service program and seamless summer option. So for the actual site component where the meal observation is observed, we do plan for those to be completed on site. So last summer, everything was done virtually for our summer reviews, either through FaceTime, Zoom, some kind of platform like that. The site observation was done, but it was done electronically from a distance. This summer, we will schedule for those to occur on site. And those will more than likely be occurring possibly in very late May, but more than likely in June and the first part of July. And reviewers will check to see what your proposed operational dates are. So if you're only planning to operate in June, then obviously we would schedule for the site observations to happen in June. Now the sponsor level or administrative level component of the review will still be a desk audit. So that will still be done in an offsite capacity. And that portion of the review is going to be done following, I believe, all of the site level reviews. So even though you may get your site visits knocked out in June, you should anticipate that the second half of the review will be a desk audit, and it will probably kick off in mid to late July and or August. And I'm sorry, on the back one slide. We did also want to note too that sometimes you'll have your review completed and then there'll be a bit of a delay before it gets back to you, your actual final review report. We are working on making that a speedier process this summer. We have some ideas that we're planning to use, but just be aware that any review instrument that does get completed by CN resource staff ultimately has to come back to the state agency for review to determine if we agree with how they're wanting to obtain corrective action for given areas. So there is always that lag time because we too have to review it before it gets turned over to the sponsor. In terms of the review instruments to be used, even though CN Resource will be conducting our reviews, they will be using Louisiana's prototype review instruments. And so when you get access to these slides, you'll be able to click directly on these 2 links to actually, see the test ahead of time. You'll be able to see which review instruments are being used for the desk audit, the sponsor level review, as well as what review instrument is being used for each of the sites that have been selected for review sites. And we did make some changes last year in the review instruments, predominantly to accommodate a lot of the flexibilities that were in place. But we really don't foresee any changes to those review instruments for this summer, minus one additional section that we're just going to add towards the back end of the sponsor review instrument. We're just going to add a reviewer's comment section right before the summary of findings, because we really don't have any place for additional comments. And so in the past, we were putting those additional comments or clarifications on responses in summary of findings. And then that was confusing sponsors because they were thinking they needed to act on something or provide something to clear that finding, when in fact it was not a finding, it was just a clarification statement. So we will break that out. We'll have a reviewer comment section followed by the summary of findings, which will only list, deficiencies or things that needed to be corrected, most of which we hope to actually correct on site during the site level observations. So sponsors certainly can request for technical assistance. So any sponsor that's participating in summer food service program or the seamless summer option, if they'd like to get some one-on-one assistance by the state agency in preparation for summer 2022, that may be in preparation for your review, or you may find that you're not even up for review, but maybe it's been a couple of summers since you've participated. You can request a TA visit by emailing our general email address, childnutritionprograms@la.gov. And we do ask that if you are requesting TA, ideally we'd like to do it before your program starts up. But the closer that we get to our typical start times, which is generally the first week of June, I'm sure our review team or our state staff are going to be pretty booked up. So it's possible that they may not be able to come out until your program has begun, which is fine. But in that email request, please do indicate a few different days that would work for you so that we can make sure that that'll fit within someone's schedule. And then our prospective new sponsors and any returning sponsor that had corrective action last summer that we told you we'd be coming back to follow up on. You can expect to receive a call or an email in the near future from a state staff member to work on scheduling those visits. Program documentation. Okay, we're all returning sponsors, participating in today's webinar, and we're down to about 40 minutes left. So I definitely want to make sure we have time for questions. So I'm going to go through this a little fast. I might skip some slides here and there, but we did want to just kind of reiterate source documents, which types of things we would expect to see when we come on site. So our school food authorities, they always cringe when we say this, but if we're being technical, in summer food service program, production records are not required. They are highly recommended, and most school food authorities tell their staff that they're required in SFSP just because they're doing that 9 months out of the year with National School Lunch and School Breakfast. Why stop? And that's fine with us. But technically speaking, they're not required. Daily meal count records, whether you're using our prototype or an equivalent, those are required. We have to have some backup for the counts that you're developing. And then satellite account forms, if they're applicable to your program, if you are satelliting or shipping meals from one cooking location to an alternate location, they're required. This is an example of the SFSP prototype production record. Again, sponsors can use it. It's another level of backup documentation to prove that you had a reimbursable meal, but I would not recommend using it unless you have really, really trained your staff on how to complete it, because an incomplete one is going to create more questions and potentially more problems than one that's completed correctly. And again, it's not required. So generally those that are completing production records, they're using the prototypes that come in their software that they normally use for school side. But just so you know, there is a template specific for SFSP. In terms of daily meal count forms, there's the USDA template, which goes up to 150 meals on page 1, with a continuation page that allows each site to be able to document up to 250 meals. With the pandemic and the consolidation of sites and the home delivery that we were seeing over the last 2 summers, and the curbside grab and go services that were happening at some sites, we realized pretty quickly in the pandemic that we were going to need a count sheet that went beyond 250. So we now also have a state agency daily meal count prototype. Either of these, the USDA or the state agency prototype, can be found in memo SFS 20-47. Either of them are acceptable to be used. And just as an FYI, our state agency prototype does go up to 620 meals. It's kind of random, but that's the way that it fell. And this is the continuation page of USDA's prototype. And we just wanted to mention, if your site does serve more than 150 children, and you do use these sheets as your backup to prove your count, if you ever do have to use a continuation page, please make sure that it gets completed in full. Please carry over the site name and the date, and if at all possible, staple those pages together. Again, like I said, satellite account forms, they're not required for all sponsors, but if you are transporting meals that are frozen, hot, cold, you absolutely do need to maintain these satellite account forms and make sure that they are being completed in full, with the individual or the driver that's shipping the meals signing off and dating, and the person that's receiving the meals also signing off, dating, and indicating time. All right, what types of documentation should be on file? This is very lengthy, but we did want to give y'all some checklists so y'all can just have those at a glance. Notice that for the second bullet, we did an asterisk because, again, as a returning sponsor, you could apply for that first week waiver, that USDA waiver that was just approved for us at the state. So you may not be required to do any first week program monitor visits because you're under that waiver. So that would be an example of where that would not be required. When we jump down to racial ethnic data form, any sponsor of the SFSP that participated in summer 2021 probably remembers that we had a new memo that came out from USDA that was talking about the procedures and processes that were used in the past in the process of collecting racial ethnic data for summer feeding. So last summer, we did not require our sponsors to complete these at each site while each site was in operation. This summer, we still, to date, have not received any further guidance on how USDA wants this to be handled. So at this time, we're not requiring the racial ethnic data form to be completed for summer 2022. However, if anything changes in the near future, we'll be sure to communicate that with everyone and make sure that everybody is aware that that requirement has kicked back into place. But as of now, we do not have a requirement for that to be filled out at each operational site for summer 2022. And then we just have some other things bulleted on here, things that we would expect to see. Some of these things may not be applicable, but the majority of them should be applicable, especially if you have built that expense category into your budget. So for example, if you've documented that X amount of your SFSP reimbursements are going to go towards mileage, and you are reimbursing maybe your program monitors for the travel that they're doing from the central office to locations to monitor, we absolutely would expect to see those mileage records, documentation of odometer readings, and support of the money that's being paid for that. Okay, go to the next slide. Of course, we'd always expect to be able to have access to your food inventories, any delivery receipts for vended meals, payroll and time and attendance records for site personnel, and any purchase invoices that support foods and or non-food items purchased for the program. Of course, we're going to be interested in looking at funds that we're accruing to your program. So any kind of cash collected, not very common with summer food service program, because that's generally the case when you're selling adult meals, selling meals to children, to adults that are accompanying children, or selling meals to like teachers and other non-program adults. We don't see that too commonly with SFSP. However, if you are doing so, you have to make sure that what you're charging those adults is enough to recoup the cost of the meal. And of course, if you're collecting money, we need to see documentation that that money is in turn being deposited into the Summer Food Service Program nonprofit account. Any cash donations for the program, we'd want to see documentation of that. And any funds that you're receiving in terms of if you get an advance issued, your reimbursements through the claim system, we need to be able to track that to your Summer Food Service Program account. This is a very, very busy slide. Again, not all of these things will necessarily be applicable to your program. However, if, for instance, you did have an agreement with the school system to furnish meals for your program, we would then expect to have some kind of contract or some written agreement that stipulates the terms between the school system and the sponsor. If you're using a food service management company with your operations, of course, we'd expect to see a contract and all the appropriate backup for that. We're always looking for training documentation, and that does tend to be a common review finding that not all of the staff were trained prior to beginning their duties, or maybe they were trained, but they didn't sign in on the sign-in sheet. So remember, we're always looking for proof of training for the current year. And then anything else that would be applicable to your program that's listed on this slide, we would expect to see if we drop in unannounced or on our scheduled review. Next slide, please. Most of the things that are listed on this slide really are accounted for on a daily meal count form or on a satellite account form. One thing that's important to mention here is that although we do have those two prototype daily meal count forms, you're not required to use those prototype forms. You may be a school system that still uses its electronic point of service for summer feeding, and that's fine. Or you may have some other form that's been developed that you're more comfortable using, and that's fine too. But please be reminded that you do need to compare what you're using to document counts with the state agency's prototype to make sure that you are accounting for all the different categories. So when the pandemic first hit, it was pretty wild. We had these curbside set up suddenly. We had some school sites that were feeding kids on site in the cafeteria or in the classroom. And they also were doing like curbside for the virtual kids. So we had multiple points of service happening and multiple different totals being tallied together to put into a claim. And in the process of that, some sponsors did kind of lose track of some of these categories. So second meals were not being captured, program adult meals were not being captured, non-program adult meals are not being captured. There were no categories to even capture that information. And though the sponsor ultimately was not providing those types of meals, they were only concerned with getting those first meals out, we still didn't have any documentation that they truly weren't. So please always make sure that your prototypes have all categories accounted for. And if you don't traditionally do second meals or program or non-program meals, you can just consistently mark 0 on those, or have a written procedure indicating that district-wide at all sites, those types of meals do not get issued, only first meals for children. We will move into common SFSP review findings, which we probably already touched on, but one of the most common findings is just incomplete hash mark or daily meal count sheets. So later in the presentation, I'm probably just going to leave that for y'all to review. We have some examples of things that we do commonly see that are incomplete. If you have new staff, if it's been a little while, you've had a break in participation, and even just in general, if you have a good program, you should be spot checking behind your site managers to make sure that they are completing hash marks fully and accurately. I already mentioned utilization of the non-prototype daily meal count form in terms of where your version does not have all the fields that we capture. Serving meals outside of an approved meal service time is also a common finding. The sponsor might operate for a couple of weeks, and then they realize that 11 a.m. was too early for lunch to begin. So they decide that they want to do 11:45 to 12:45. That's fine, but you have to communicate that to the state agency first via an online application revision, get approval to change those times, republicize those times, and then you may switch the times in which you are serving meals. And then no point of service has actually been an issue in recent summers with all the flexibilities provided because of the pandemic, just because there's been so many points where kids are actually receiving meals, and sometimes clickers were used and the backup count was recorded, but it was not clear. You know, it was recorded like on the original count sheet that we used in the cafeteria, but it wasn't clear where that count was coming from, that it was a curbside or. So we have had issues in that area in past summers. Okay, so this is just an example of a complete daily meal count form. This is just a reminder again that if you need to have a continuation page, please make sure that that page is not just loose and floating on a stack of papers. And please also make sure that everything that should be filled out on it is filled out, including site name, meal type, and date. Here's our template that goes up to 620 meals. That's posted in memo 20-47. And then we will, I think I'm mostly going to skip over these. These are the same examples that we provided last year. So each slide, I think there's 3 total examples. It'll show you an example of a daily meal count form that was completed not in full. And then the next slide will tell you what the issue was with each example. And remember, I think the main driving point that I wanted to get out with these examples is that if you are missing a series of hash marks, so if if your staff marked 1 through 50, and then they skipped 51 through 55, and then continued with marking on 60 forward, any missing hash marks, we're not going to allow those to be counted towards reimbursement. So if the sponsor has not yet claimed, we're going to document in the review instruments that it's site A for whatever date those documents were reviewed. X number of meals cannot be claimed for that meal service. So just remember, missing hash marks or any type of like straight line that's continuing or linking numbers, like a straight line from 100 through 110, we're not going to recognize that as reimbursable meals. So those ultimately will get taken. If a claim has already been filed, we'll either get it released back for correction, or you'll have to do a revision to remove those and then pay the department back the amount of money for the disallowed meals. So please be checking behind site staff to make sure that they are filling these out properly and completely. Other common review findings, like I mentioned, staff training. Sponsors will say that it was done on these dates, everybody participated, they just don't necessarily have the sign-in sheet for every staff member that came because they had to do some repeat sessions for some late hires. Keep all of that documentation. So even though you may have to conduct these trainings on a series of days, and even though you may have to do a late training for some late hires, all of that's fine as long as you conducted the training before the staff member has actually taken on their responsibilities, and you maintain that documentation of the sign-in sheet, any agenda that you've developed, and the actual training materials that you use for that training. Courtney mentioned it, and I did as well. Incorrect use of offer versus serve is a common finding, especially with breakfast with the SFSP meal pattern. Another common finding is non-budgeted expenses. So we'll find that the sponsor, in completing their sponsor level online application, they're building their budget. They failed to indicate that they were going to have any expenses towards leasing of equipment or vehicles. So they left those as zeroed out fields in the budget. And then we come on site for a review and we find that there are leased vehicles and or equipment. And the sponsor may have the proper contracts to back it up, which technically makes it an allowable, use of SFSP funds. But if you didn't tell us up front in your online application that that was going to be a budgeted expense, we could disallow that and require that you pay back those amounts with some non-federal funding source. So be sure that you are including in your budget any and all expenses that you plan to pay with SFSP monies. And if things change along the way, if you suddenly realize that mileage is going to be more expensive than what you had originally allocated for, that's what the revisions process is for, to revise your application, update it, and then submit the changes for approval. And then we also mentioned less than arm's length transactions. So that's basically where you're doing business with a company where your sister or brother-in-law is employed. We're not saying you can't do business with that company, but if you're planning on entering into a contract with a company where you know someone personally, you have a relationship with that person, that needs to be disclosed to the state agency before you make any decision in terms of which company you're going to go with and on what grounds. So please disclose that information if you are planning on potentially having a company bid on your procurement where you actually have a relationship with that company pre-existing. I think we've really already talked about this, just the need to revise your application as you're notified of changes. And, things happen. Sometimes things happen very last minute. A staff member walks off from the site and you have to suddenly replace them like ASAP. If it's something that just happens suddenly, you can always email me to give me the heads up of the revision that's going to be coming, but you're not technically approved of that change until you've actually completed that revision through the online system, submitted it, and gotten approval for that change. So because we're having to do these trainings virtually and in Zoom format, there's so much to cover. And there's so much that has changed annually over the last few years with the pandemic. It's just not possible to cover everything as in depth as we would like. So we have decided to do some additional trainings on select topics. So as of right now, we have 5 additional training topics for summer food service program that have been scheduled. Later this month, we're going to have 2 procurement related summer food service program trainings. We'll have a general one on the 19th, and then we'll have one that talks about completion of the procurement plan on the 26th. On May the 5th, we'll have one that goes into more depth on the waiver process. I'm hoping the website will be open at that point, and we can actually have screenshots and walk you through exactly how to opt in to the various waivers. On May the 10th, we're going to have one on record keeping requirements with summer food service program. And on May 17th, we're going to have one that talks specifically about revising your online application as changes are communicated to you. I don't think all of these are up on the Louisiana Fit Kids website yet, but they will be in the very near future. So just make sure that you flag these dates in your calendar. I think the April ones are there, so you can go in and get those details and register now. But just be aware that we're going to have these additional trainings, and there may be more that get added, as questions start to come in. Okay, so as always, any general questions related to any of the child nutrition programs that we oversee in this section, summer food service program, seamless summer option, national school lunch program, school breakfast program, fresh fruit and vegetable program, those can come to the child nutrition programs at la.gov web address, email address. Or if you have anything that's a direct specific question, possibly relating to closed enrolled site eligibility, anything that you think is more of a direct question that you're going to need like a custom answer for, you can always contact me directly. The 342-9661 number is our general number for this side, and you can reach any of our staff on that number. And my direct email address is also included on this slide. All right, let's open it up for questions.
Okay, we have a few questions. The first one, this is from a school system. They are currently doing the seamless summer option, but they missed the seamless summer option training. And they're asking, would they just do a revision for the seamless summer application for the summer?
So I think we did mention in the beginning that we did have a training last Monday. We planned it pretty quick. On seamless summer option in the summer months once the academic school year has ended. So again, that's only an option for our school food authority sponsors. If those slides are not yet posted to Louisiana Fit Kids, they should be within the next few business days. But to answer your question in short, yes, any school food authority that's currently operating under seamless summer option would revise their current year or program year 2022 seamless waiver or seamless summer option application to extend their operations, into June or however they want to operate. Not to confuse the SFSP participants on the call, but under seamless summer option, there are some of those annual waivers that USDA had set to expire June 30th. So they're not available on summer side under SFSP, but under seamless summer option, we do still have some waivers that are available through June 30th, not beyond. That do relate to non-congregate options. So some of our school systems are electing to, especially those that are just planning to have a short-lived program just through June and not to extend into July. A lot of them are choosing to just revise their existing seamless summer option application, extend the calendar at the sites that are going to continue to operate beyond the close of the academic school year, and then update site type, meal service timing, ADPs as needed. If you can wait until May to do that revision, that's ideal. We don't want you to do it too early, especially if you're changing times and ADPs and things, because we don't want it to mess up your final claiming of the school year. But yeah, so anybody that's thinking about extending seamless beyond the end of the academic school year, you would do so via a revision to your online seamless application. And we do recommend that you wait until early to mid-May before you actually do that revision.
Okay, the next question is there a possibility that not all sponsors will be reviewed this year?
So last summer, I think we had about 150 or 160 summer food service program sponsors. We're not exactly sure how many are going to choose to go that route versus SSO this year because the school systems have this additional flexibility. But Originally, we had earmarked about 65 or 70 reviews, but I'm thinking that that may actually decline because USDA has told us that the school system is receiving an administrative review in school year 2021 or is scheduled to receive one next year in 22-23. We are not required to do an SFSP or SSO review in summer 2022. So that gives us some flexibility. So some of the school systems that we thought we were going to have to review this summer, because this just happens to be year 3 of our 3-year SFSP review cycle, where we have to hurry up and catch anybody that we had missed in the past, we may have some flexibility where we can bump them back and not have to review them this summer. But like I said, I'm going to work on that next week with all of that in mind, and we should have at least a lineup of who's going to get reviewed this summer in the coming weeks.
Okay, the next question is, what is the process if a sponsor closes sites before the approved end date? And what is the sponsor's responsibility to both the state and the parents in that instance?
Okay, so if a sponsor knows, and this happens pretty often from summer to summer, even more so with the pandemic because things are just so up in the air with everything. But if a sponsor knows that they're going to be ending operations earlier than what they were approved to operate through, it's that sponsor's responsibility to immediately begin working on a revision to their online application, revising as many facility level applications as required. So if they're closing a week early across the board, all sites, they need to revise their entire application. Sponsor users are allowed to revise applications and delete calendar days that have not yet happened. So future dates, you certainly can revise your application, go to your calendars, edit them, and start clicking those days away, changing them from green to white, non-operational. Days that are the current day or days that have passed, sponsor users have to contact me for assistance with getting those dates removed. The system does not allow sponsor users to delete current day of operations or dates that have passed. But if you know your program is going to end early, you know this in advance, get that revision in, get your application to reflect the new end date. You may have to do some adjustments to your budget. More than likely you will, because now you're going to be getting less anticipated reimbursement. And so your budget might be exceeding the anticipated reimbursement at this point. But it's your responsibility to notify us of that, get approval of that, then in turn to notify the households to do a new media release if you have open or restricted open sites, informing the community of the new end date. So you have a responsibility to notify both the state agency and the families.
This is a follow-up question to the one that we just had. Can you stop serving meals before, just immediately without providing any notice to the families?
No. If there's something that is major health and safety related, you obviously, and you had to quit operations, an emergency situation, you had to stop operations right then obviously you would immediately contact LDH to notify them of the issue. And then you would immediately notify Department of Education. You can email me, Shauna Leger, directly to let me know what's going on and at which sites you've had to immediately shut down operations and whether that's temporary or for the duration of the summer. And then you would still be required to go in and revise your online application to reflect the dates that are not going to be operational that previously have been indicated as such.
Okay, the next question is regarding the review. So since there are some schools that return earlier for their fall semester, can they request an earlier desk audit for their review because it will interfere with the opening of school responsibilities that they may have in July or August?
For that, you can certainly request it. You can email Shauna.leger@la.gov. Let me know what's going on and when you would like to ultimately have that desk audit. I can't guarantee whether or not we can accommodate that because it all depends on our review lineup. Once I take into account these flexibilities, we may have much fewer that need to be reviewed than what we had originally anticipated. But at one point, when I realized it was year 3 of the 3-year cycle, kind of began to panic because it looked like there was going to be about 100 reviews, in which case there would have been no way that we could speed up the process. But it looks like there's going to be fewer sponsors that need reviews. So that may be something that can be accommodated. And I certainly would pass that on to CN resource staff.
I sure can. Okay, the next question is, how do we change the name of the person connected to the sponsor? They're not changing the sponsor, but they're changing the person who represents the sponsor.
So that sounds like that is a change to your, either your head of the organization or your authorized representative. And we certainly have, Courtney is pulling up that template form. And we can show you how to go ahead and do that. So from our CMP homepage, which has changed a little bit, the format of it, you're probably going to be redirected to this. You would just click on sign in, and then Child Nutrition Program website, then memos, resources, below the login, summer food service program, forms. I think it's under general forms. It's called CMP's site. No,
CMP Single Permanent Agreement Information Sheet.
Okay. So it's CMP Single Permanent Information Sheet. Okay. So this has taken the place, for sponsors that have been doing this for a long time, this has taken the place of the agreement amendment process that used to be initiated through the CMP website. Now we use this form for all child nutrition programs. So you always want to type in the name of your organization at the top, and then you only need to fill in the boxes where there is information that is changing for your organization. So if your superintendent / head / executive director is not changing, you don't have to retype that person's name and information. You only need to fill in the areas that are changing with the new information, and then make sure that the head of the organization or the authorized representative sign and date it. You can scan this document once completed and email it to childnutritionprograms@la.gov, but we do also want the original, correct?
Correct.
So we also need the original mailed to us. So this is the new process for an agreement amendment. This is only at the sponsor level. If you would need to change something related with your sponsoring organization's name, central office or central address, and or change contact information for the head, the board chairman, or the authorized rep.
Okay, are there any more questions? I think we've gone through the questions in the chat box. If you have any more, please enter those so we can get those questions answered. If you come up with questions after this training, you can feel free to email or call us. So you can email at childnutritionprograms@la.gov, or you can call us at 342-9661. Any more questions? We have 2 more trainings this week. Both of them are for prospective new sponsors, tomorrow and then again on Thursday. We also have 2 trainings for summer food service, just some very specific topics. The first 2 are related to procurement in April. Those are posted on Louisiana Fit Kids. The seamless summer training that was done last week is also posted on Louisiana Fit Kids under training slides. For the sponsor that asked that question, you can refer to that for more information.
For anyone that is considering, anyone on this call right now that's a school food authority that is considering doing the seamless summer option route and not the SFSP route this summer, if you did not get to participate in last Monday's training, like Courtney said, the slides and the recording should be on the LA Fit Kids website now. Please view that because there are waivers that are optional are available through June 30th under seamless that are not going to be available for SFSP. So, we want to make sure that you understand those options, and we want to make sure that if you do plan to use any of those additional flexibilities, that you have opted into those in the application, because some sponsors did not opt into those for the academic school year, but now they're considering doing curbside pickup under seamless summer option in June. So we have to make sure that not only are we revising and extending our operations under the seamless program, but we're also confirming that we have the proper waivers elected. So there may be further work needed in that regard too.
All right, if there are no more questions, we're going to end this training for today. And if you come up with any questions after this is ended, please contact us and we'd be happy to help. Thank you.